Hello there, Bunneh here, and I challenged myself to survive for 50 days on Sons of the Force hardest difficulty. Food and water are much harder to come by, temperature plays a larger role in survival, and enemies hit insanely hard. In addition to these difficulties, I've also tasked myself with acquiring every single item in the game, just to spice things up. So join me as I survive the cruelties of the wild, discover hidden secrets, explore new technologies, and try to entertain myself by whatever means possible before ultimately facing off against the toughest challenge the game has to offer. Day 1 begins with a short intro cutscene talking about something. I'll be honest, I didn't pay much attention to the storyline of the first game, let alone this sequel, so I only loosely know what's going on. I do know that the storyline revolves around this Puffington family and their daughter Virginia, who I'll be working with very shortly. Now, full disclosure up front, I already completed this entire game cooperatively with a few buddies of mine, but there was quite a bit of content that I missed that I plan on experiencing in this solo playthrough. Long story short, the helicopter gets shot down because the local natives have access to advanced firearms for some reason. Now, there's no way in hell I'd actually survive this crash, but I digress. I wake up relatively unscathed and pick up our backpack and tactical emergency pouch. This little pouch gives us access to the knife, the hatchet, survival handbook, and a GPS. Nearby is another survivor from the crash who's thrashing around like a toddler in a pool of pudding. His name is Kelvin, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to notice that he's either dense as fuck or suffered a lot of damage from the crash. Given that he's bleeding from his ears, I'm gonna go with the latter. Now, in my first playthrough of the game, I never got to experience the utility of Kelvin because one of my buddies thought it would be absolutely hilarious to kill him immediately, so I look forward to actually using him this time around. He's basically an NPC that can be commanded to passively gather resources in the background, which is going to come in clutch considering this game can be absolutely unforgiving at times. I take a few minutes to loot the crash site for as many base resources as I can get my hands on, and while I do plan on drawing attention to the major items in the game, I'm not going to make a big deal out of the common, stackable resources. Basically, anything that is a tool, weapon, or otherwise unstackable, I consider to be a big deal, whereas most other resources are unremarkable. After looting the crash site, I start making my way towards our first objective in the series, which is obtaining the slingshot. It's an item that me and my buddies ended up finding towards the very end of our playthrough and never got to fully take advantage of, so I was looking forward to using it for some hunting in the early game. Along the way, I made the effort to gather some sticks and eat some berries, as passively harvesting things like this was crucial to survival. After a short trek, I reached the slingshot location and bind it for some easy access. My next objective was the flashlight, which can be acquired by cutting this rope that's suspending a guy hanging from the cliff. This is a huge quality of life upgrade that would be incredibly useful in the near future. Next, I crafted our first item in the game, the repair tool. This item does exactly what it sounds like it does. It repairs damaged or broken structures, which I had a feeling there was going to be a lot of once I started building. I tried to take out a few birds with our new slingshot, but alas, this thing was hot dog shit and I couldn't hit the broadside of a brontosaurus with it. I stumbled across another camp a short distance from the flashlight location, and I spent a few minutes looting the place. Inadvertently, I find the modern axe, which is an upgrade that I was certainly going for in the near future, but honestly had no idea was this close to it. I mean, this was intentional, obviously! I also found a cooking pot, which is an absolutely huge thing to acquire in the early game because it helps with food production. After whiffing an ungodly amount of slingshots, I decided to take down this wild game the old-fashioned way, and yes, I'm aware it's a Bunneh, but cannibalism is acceptable in times of crisis. Just ask the Donner Party. Plus, it's an item checked off the list, so go me. Also, Kelvin found something that he's either eating or shoving into his nose. Either way, I'm not sure it's a good idea to let him do it. I stumble across another camp, and lucky for us, there's a creature tied up just begging to be executed. Creatures like this yield creepy armor, which is a solid set of armor to have at any point in the game, but especially in the early game. The local inhabitants aren't too happy about us killing their prisoner though, so naturally I have to take them out and loot all their homes. With all of our newfound resources and inability to land a rock from a slingshot, I decide to make a crafted bow, which is the best bow that I'm gonna have for a good while. I take out a bird the old-fashioned way and pluck its feathers from the air to craft up some arrows in the near future. I decided to start cooking up some food because it was already reaching towards the end of the day, and I didn't want to overdo it with the exploration side of things. After all, this series is about survival more than it is speedrunning, and I knew that food and water are going to be problems early on. Luckily, with our newfound cooking pot and wild game that I bagged, I was able to cook up a nice pot of boiled meat. While that was cooking up, I decided to thumb through the survival handbook to give you all a glimpse of how this game functions. It's basically a picture book, and if someone can't figure out the instructions based off of pictures like this, they might be as dense as Kelvin. I don't plan on showing everything off here, of course, but just recognize that this is how you learn to build or craft things in the game. I grab our pot of boiled meat off the fire with the intention of saving it until morning, as if you eat before going to sleep, all that food and water gained is essentially lost overnight, which is a huge waste of time and resources. Next, I craft a torch, which is not only an excellent tool for illumination, but also a solid melee weapon. I get into another fight on the beach and realize just how dangerous hardcore survival mode is. Enemies like this normally hit for small fractions of health, but as you can see here, a single basic cannibal attack can absolutely destroy us if we're not careful. Luckily, that's what drugs are for, so I heal up, take them out, enjoy the incredible graphics of this beautiful game, and set up a tent on the beach for the night. Tents are basically save points that allow you to sleep the night away, kinda like the beds in Minecraft, although upon doing so drains your food and water like crazy. Day 2 begins, and I'm dying. Luckily, we got this cooking pot full of meat that should restore all of our food and water with just a sip or two. Oh. Hardcore survival. Right. This is gonna be interesting. I decide to slap on that piece of creepy armor for some added protection and craft up some arrows to hunt with. Along the beach are loads of birds to replenish our arrows, which is going to be critical for the next thing I have in mind. You see, out on the water is this floating raft tent thing, and inside of it is a pistol. The only problem is, it's guarded by a shark, and rather than waste precious pistol ammo, I'd rather just shoot it with arrows once we get there. The swim is long and treacherous, and right before I reach the raft, the shark catches up with me. Luckily, that armor I put on beforehand absorbs the damage, and I can make it around the front to climb aboard. Inside is the aforementioned pistol, which is going to be critical for survival. There's also a GPS locator that I could use to track a location, but it's not really important. Now, as for that shark, it's nothing a few well-placed arrows won't take care of. We swim our way back to shore and find Kelvin being Kelvin, but ain't nobody got time for that!
Ain't nobody got time for that!
The next top priority for me was making my way towards my chosen base spot. It's a bit of a hike, but I knew it would be well worth it in the end. You see, all of the ponds and lakes in Sons of the Forest will freeze during the winter months, making water incredibly difficult to come by, but flowing bodies of water, such as rivers, won't. Because of this, I knew I wanted to build near a river, and it just so happens that there's one located very close to an underground bunker that has a 3D printer, which we'll get into more later. This spot also has a cute little pond below it, which is perfect for catching fish during the appropriate seasons. I decide to begin constructing a fish trap so they're passively accumulating in the background, and command Kelvin to gather some resources for the first time. Now at first, it looks like I asked him a quantum physics question, but eventually he figures it out. After the traps were constructed, I walked up above to where I wanted to build my base. Conveniently, there's also a cooking pot spawn here, which is incredible for mass-producing food. There's also circuit boards in the laptops, cereal, ropes, watches, and vodka. The Night 5 vehicle also spawns here, which is just incredible. I do get attacked by a few golem-looking cannibals, but they go down pretty fast. Honestly, we get attacked a lot in this playthrough, and I don't plan on addressing it every single time, just know that we're always in danger. Next, I decided to construct a storage bin for stones. I also discovered that Kelvin could fish. I'm not really sure how he figured out how to do that, but I'm just gonna roll with it. The fish traps were working tremendously as well, so far this base was a fantastic choice. Nighttime begins to roll in pretty quick, so I throw a pot of food on for the morning. While that's cooking up, I decide to build a shelving unit to begin storing some of the resources that respawn here. This will give you guys a quick look at how woodcutting works in the game, which in my opinion is one of the greatest systems I've ever seen in a survival game. We slap the wood into the shelving unit to complete it, pick up the spare cooking pot, and catch our first glance of Virginia approaching our camp. Now she is rocking some screamin' nipples at all points in time in that outfit, which I really wish I could show you all, but I'm not entirely sure YouTube will be happy with me for it, so I'm gonna have to blur it out until we can get her a different outfit.
I'm so sorry. I know my demographics and you're not gonna be happy with it.
As I mentioned before, I don't know the full story behind her, and just like with Kelvin, my one buddy thought it was hilarious to kill her on sight during my first playthrough, so I never got to experience her. Non-sexually, of course. From what I do know, she's friendly, but only once she spends time around us and deems us safe, so for the time being, we're just gonna let her do her thing. And then hopefully me. But no, seriously, that third leg could probably do wonders. I mean, could you imagine the positions?
Hallelujah.
Day 3 begins with me stockpiling some resources on our shelf and harvesting all of the stone that I can get my grubby little Bunneh paws on. Virginia is getting a little more frisky, but still unsure of us for now. I start working on laying out the foundation of our base in stone, and while I plan on glossing over most of the building in this playthrough, I feel it's important for you guys to understand how it works. Everything basically snaps together in rows for set distances, which makes building fairly easy, but it's otherwise completely freeform. There are some pre-made structures in a survival handbook, but honestly, I would rather just build the thing I want myself. Most of the time the building works great, but some areas are extremely finicky, like this spot right here that I was never able to fully extend out. I command Kelvin to get us some breakfast and add some stone around our campfire for added support. Next, I cut down a tree and break them into logs for some firewood, which greatly extends the length of time the campfire burns for. It's touches like this that make the game feel so damn good. I mean, being able to completely split the logs into multiple sections like this and have each interactable and usable is just beautiful. We continue to work on the base, but end up getting interrupted multiple times from cannibals who absolutely destroy my health pool. Luckily, drugs, and we press onwards. Virginia keeps walking seductively through my camp to distract me from my important work, but these pillars aren't gonna build themselves, girl. Oh, god damn! Flash forwards a bit and we finish the frame in stone, and while I would love to build this entire thing out of stone at some point, it's not feasible right now with the limited spawns. I knew I was going to have to resort to building it out of wood, so I got to work on chopping down some trees. It's pretty sweet how you can just take a log and split it to lay down the floor planks, and the walls are basically just stacked logs. Granted, it takes a lot of wood to actually make progress like this, but it's enjoyable and much faster than stone. Since I was cutting down so many trees, I decided to whip up a pot of Greg, which is a crafted recipe made entirely from cannibal parts and drastically boosts your wood cutting rate. While I was cooking that, I decided to construct a drying rack for some of the fish we were starting to accumulate. This would keep it from rotting in my inventory and preserve it for longer periods of time, which is crucial for surviving the winter. We take a sip of Greg, and get to work on cutting down some trees. If you can tell, I'm chopping them down a lot faster now, which helps with getting these walls up quicker. Now as for the door, you basically just have to carve out where you want it and lay down some planks horizontally. Then you can attach a stick to it that acts like a door lock. As for the roof, I started with lumber beams, but then changed my mind to stone since I didn't need a whole lot of it and planned on it being permanent. Night was steadily approaching, and while I was close to finishing the base, I wasn't close enough. I placed down a blueprint for the bed, but didn't quite have the resources to finish it right now, so I slept the night in a tent outside. Day 4 begins, and it's quite similar to the previous one, to be honest. We stockpile resources, order Kelvin to get us some breakfast because fuck you Kelvin, and get to work on gathering stone again. Now I feel the need to point out that these resources only respawn when you restart the game, and it's a very common exploit to simply gather everything, save your game, restart the game, and repeat. I did not do this for any portion of my playthrough, but simply gathered the resources I could at times when I would naturally stop and start the game. Keep in mind that each in-game day is a little over 30 minutes, and it doesn't take a mathematician to figure out that a 50-day survival challenge like this was going to take me well over 25 hours to complete, so there was plenty of natural breaks in gameplay. Part of my time was spent building a small deck around my house, but another portion of my time was spent slowly converting some of the walls to stone. That is, when I wasn't under siege, and no, not the Steven Seagal movie. At one point I decided to pike a skull on a stick, which essentially acts as a scarecrow for these little golem-looking cannibals. In addition to that, it also attracts birds for some reason, which is a great way of stockpiling feathers for arrows. Upon exiting my house, I see that Virginia was approaching it for a little bit of slap-ass, but then runs away when she sees how big my stick is. I finish off the roof of the house and install a solar panel. This allows me to run wiring on the inside of the house for lights, which makes life a lot easier during the nighttime. At some point in time, I had commanded Kelvin to gather logs, which pays off tremendously because this dude loves smacking trees like a fucking Neanderthal. With his unnatural toddler strength and my ability to place things, we make fast work of the deck surrounding our house, which I fully intended on turning into a defensive wall of sorts. At one point, I make a few stick holders because I knew that I would be needing lots of sticks for various building projects, and I would need the storage. Our little defensive wall around the base was coming along nicely, except this problem spot that wouldn't let me place anything to stop me from falling off the ledge. Once I had 2 rows of logs around the outside of the deck, I began placing sticks an equidistance apart from each other, and you'll see why in just a minute. But first, I have to introduce myself to the neighbor that stopped in. Hi buddy, how's it going? Sticks can be knocked over to make a defensive spike wall, and having them placed behind a short wall like this helps to protect them from taking damage from enemy attacks. Stabilizing them with rocks like this helps to preserve them tremendously, and I knew from past experience that having spikes like this was a godsend during attacks. While I didn't get all of the wall complete, I did make some great progress before sleeping the night off. Day 5 begins, and I want you all to appreciate just how fucked up this animation is. I mean, who goes for the head first? I order Kelvin to gather some rocks for the spike walls and get straight back to work on the defenses. I also build a small ramp leading up to our front door for easier access, and decide to take out this stump so the tree doesn't regrow. We finish the defensive wall shortly into the morning, and I can honestly say I'm feeling pretty good about this base right now. We head down to the pond to check our fish traps and decide to construct another drying rack to speed up production. Upon returning to base, I realized how many logs I had lying around, so I decided to cut them into firewood and stack them outside for use in the future. After this, I decided to journey to that nearby underground bunker that I mentioned earlier. As a first-time player, this crevice terrified me. Upon first walking inside, I had a really uneasy feeling about it, but I knew from past experience that this place was completely safe, at least until later in the game. Inside this first room is a 3D printer, which can be used to make a few different items using printer resin. There's also tons of resources down here, like batteries, tape, solar panels, light bulbs, crossbow bolts, carbon fiber arrows, and wire. All of these items are critical for our success, and this bunker would be a renewable safe haven for acquiring them on a consistent basis. The 3D printer comes preloaded with some ink, and we use it to make a flask, which can be used to store clean water for longer travels. We also print a red mask, which from my understanding can be used to scare away cannibals. We use the remaining ink to print 2 pieces of tech mesh, which is used to craft the highest tier of armor in the game. We also try to cook some food and set off the bunker's sprinkler system in the process. Whoopsies! At the other end of the bunker is a well-lit room with a few useful item spawns, and towards the back end of the room is another larger area that can be accessed with a keycard in the future, but that comes into play much later. We head back to base and once again see that Virginia is stalking us seductively. I mean, just take your clothes off already! We convert those 2 pieces of tech mesh into armor pieces using circuit boards, batteries, and tape, but rather than save it, I decided to wear it for now since I had no other armor to my name. Base construction is once again top priority, and I begin demolishing some of the wood in favor of stone I've been collecting. But this was interrupted by Virginia kindly offering us some salmon berries and then committing to a form of harry-carry. With our front wall entirely stone, I once again had to carve it out to make room for a door. All I can say is that this looks incredibly painful to do in real life. The leftover wood from the previous door gets repurposed into firewood that I stack alongside our house, but you can't place it on a solid foundation, so I had to remove the floorboards to stack it on the terrain and then replace the floorboards after. After briefly looking through the survival handbook, I come across this ridiculous-looking trap that I just had to build. Was it really effective? Not really, but I didn't really know that at the time. I filled our new canteen with some freshly boiled water, and oh, hello, Virginia! What you got there? Is that a rock? Thanks. Okay. I'm just gonna go to sleep. Feel free to join me! Day 6 begins with us making a birdhouse, which is essentially the same thing as a fish trap, but yields feathers instead. Virginia bestows upon us another sacrificial rock and seems to be settling in nicely. Oh my god! Virginia, you're not much of a virgin, are you? All joking aside, it would seem that we've reached max reputation with her, because now she walks right up to us and we have the option to give her certain items. One of the options is our pistol that she can use to help defend the base, and the other outline kind of looks like the shotgun. I was hesitant to give her the pistol right now, though, because I figured that I might need it still, so I'm just going to hold on to it for now. We convert more of the base into stone, but cannibals. I thought this was the best time to try out that red mask that we made, and initially it did kind of work, but then they just come right back afterwards, so it's kind of pointless. Fortunately, the torch works wonders, and that new trap was kind of effective, albeit clunky at times. These guys that look all slimy are actually armored and take quite a few hits to take down, which makes them pretty dangerous to fight. Because of this, I changed my mind on giving Virginia that pistol and let her go to town with her third turret arm, which I must say is fucking awesome. I also replace our skull on a stick and reinforce it with some stones to hopefully deter some more of these attacks. Now, I hadn't really mentioned this before, but I've been taking all of these bodies and burning them on the campfire to make bones, which can be used with duct tape and rope to make bone armor. It's primitive and doesn't really hold up all that well, but in a difficulty mode like this, it's almost necessary to have some kind of armor to avoid getting one-shotted. On the way back to check our fish traps, my buddy joins the Discord chat and announces his presence. Some of you may know him as the voice of Ivan in some of my Ark videos, and if you don't, this is him.
Oh my god.
With the base being slowly converted to stone and most of the inside defensive wall done, I figured it was time to get up some perimeter walls. Logs can be placed straight up and down and snapped against each other to make a long-running wall. Then the tops can be cut into spikes. This was going to become the next side project along with the stone conversion, because these constant attacks were getting a bit overwhelming at times. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm like fucking Hawkeye with a bow, but for every alien encounter that I survive, there's always a snowplow waiting around the corner. Okay, I'm sorry, Jeremy Renner, I had to, and I really hope you're recovering well. The supply of bones was definitely coming in handy, though, and I learned that cooked fish was a great way of restoring health in place of meds. We worked on the stone conversion until we couldn't see our toes anymore, and decided to get some well-earned rest. Day 7 begins with breakfast, full-fledged slavery, and oh my god! If you thought her nipples were screaming before, you should see what I'm seeing right now. Good god, Virginia. I decided to see what giving her that GPS locator would do, which as it turns out enables us to track her on our GPS. Now, I don't know about you guys, but at this point I was getting pretty tired of base building and wanted a bit of a change of pace. I decided that with our full health and nearly full armor, it was time to tackle our first cave, which would provide us with the stun gun and rebreather. Now this cave wasn't particularly close, so I hopped on the Night 5 vehicle to make the journey a bit more bearable. This thing is basically akin to the One Wheel, and is wicked fast. So fast, in fact, that most of the time I just tap my way through the forest, because if you go full throttle like this happens. Now luckily you don't suffer any fall damage from this, but it does get quite annoying since it happens so frequently. These things are crazy good on the beach though, because there's not that many obstacles, and you can just full throttle it. Now I just want you all to take a moment to appreciate the water physics and graphics of this game. They are truly incredible and have some of the greatest looking effects that I've ever seen in a game. I did find some resources along the beach that I grabbed, but ultimately we're here for the cave splunking. We climb our way into the crevice and find some ammo alongside a GPS locator for a place called the Entertainment Bunker. Now you're meant to do these caves in a certain order, and some of them you have to, but at some points in this series I do venture off the beaten path for the sake of acquiring a certain item. There are usually collectible lore pages like this in the main points of interest, but since they're not on my item list, and for the sake of saving time, I plan on omitting most of the clips of me finding them. The cave gets creepier and creepier the deeper that we delve, but fun little rigid bodies like this help to break up the intensity. Not far in, we run into our first combat encounter with a new type of enemy, and I know from past experience that these things are not to be fucked with. If you attack them quickly like I do here, you can oftentimes wipe them out with minimal issues, but if there are multiple of them and they start dancing around, they can be very challenging to avoid. On the plus side, they do offer creepy armor when you kill them, which is certainly going to come in handy. Not much further ahead is another type of new enemy, and these guys are absolutely brutal. They take loads of damage, and no matter how I approach them, I always seem to get hit. The bone armor that we made gets absolutely shredded, but at least we have the creepy armor to supplement. I also find and eat this cave fish off the floor, and before you judge me, I was famished. My mother told me to never fuck a gift horse in the mouth. Or something like that. Up ahead are loads more enemies that chew through my armor no matter how I approach them. At one point, I decide to use a grenade that we looted from a camp to help take out a few of them, which helps tremendously. These little deformed baby-looking things are quite a nuisance, and despite seeming fairly harmless, they can do a ton of damage if left unchecked. Shortly ahead is one of the main items that we came here for, the stun gun. This thing is crazy good against certain creatures, especially those giant finger mouth things. The room adjacent to this one has something incredibly disturbing trudge on by, but from what I can tell there's no way to access this area, so I just move on. In the next chamber is a large pool of water that I knew from my last playthrough had a shark inside of it. I tried to throw in some nearby limbs to see if I could lure it in, but it didn't work. Along the edge of the water was another item that we came here for, the rebreather. This thing is basically a scuba tank, and allows us to breathe underwater. Now, for me to get out of here, I have to swim through this watering hole, but like I said before, I know there's a shark in here. I scattered some flares around to see if I could spot it, but alas, I didn't see it anywhere, and after a while, I just said fuck it and dove in. Apparently, the shark spawn is not guaranteed because there's nothing here, which I was completely fine with. We swim back to shore, get attacked by a cannibal who wanted to test his fire resistance, and then set up a camp for the night to get some rest. Day 8 begins, and given where I'm located right now, I decide to explore down the beach before returning to base. I knew there was another item not far off from here that I could check off our list, that item being the machete. This was actually a pretty solid melee weapon in its own right, but the modern axe that I looted earlier is actually better if you can believe that. I loot the camp to replenish that grenade that we used earlier, and also discover the shotgun rail, which is another item checked off the list, but something that I didn't even know was here. I mean, I'm professional! With the camp fully looted, we soar down the beach to the next major point of interest, but along the way we come across another cannibal camp. Despite my best efforts to avoid this giant's attacks, he still manages to flatten my ass. Some well-placed headshots go a long way here though, and we finish off every last cannibal in sight. In the chaos of it all, we come across a turtle, which is absolutely huge because we can harvest it for its shell, its head, and some raw meat. Now I also want to freeze frame here because on screen is another item that becomes tremendously stressful to acquire later down the line, that item being the turtle egg. Now these ones are all smashed, probably from me, so I couldn't pick them up at the time. I also didn't realize it, but this item is only available at certain points of time in the game. Without spoiling anything, let's just say that trying to acquire them later becomes extremely difficult, and I may or may not succeed. You'll just have to wait and see. We execute another prisoner that was chained up inside of the camp, and harvest his armor for some resemblance of protection because I'm desperate. I nail this sick ollie over the water's edge, and as you can see, we've arrived at the next point of interest. These boats are actually pretty sweet, and they've got loads of resources like cereal, ramen, ropes, drugs, cloth, and a couple story items that don't really mean a whole lot to me. We start heading back to base because I knew it was going to be a long journey, but on the way we decide to swing into that bunker to craft some more tech mesh. Because this stuff was so expensive and took so much resin to craft, it was really important that we stockpile this early on. I wanted to have a full set of this stuff for the final boss fight, which means we have to start grinding on this now. Back at the base, all of our fish had finished drying and I was ready to store some on shelves for the winter. Keeping these drying racks stocked and all of the shelves filled was insanely important for survival, and I didn't want to skimp on my duties. At this point, I decided it was time to start constructing a log sled, which would help immensely with gathering logs, but more importantly, stones. It was basically a movable storage bin for these resources, and given that there was a lot of stone just out of reach below me, this would speed up progress immensely. I even decided to construct a small bridge so I can get over this section of the river, which was a great move because I ended up using this thing a lot. We take our load back to the base just in time for nightfall and get some much-needed sleep in the comfort of our base. Day 9 begins with a hearty breakfast, but shortly after that, Virginia decides to bring us a fish, and I didn't want to be rude, so I dove right in. I wanted to make more progress on the stone conversion, but this one wall in the back just refused to disassemble, so I had to do it the old-fashioned way. That supply of stone that I brought up the night before went a really long ways towards further building up the base, but a few more trips were necessary to finish off the job. I was concerned that my axe swinging had damaged some of the other structures inside of my house, so I smacked my little stick rock around to repair things.
Look at me, Mom, am I doing good?
With the base now fully stone, I figured the next best investment would be a stone fireplace. This was basically the top-tier campfire that you could build, as campfires lasted a lot longer inside of it and would essentially cut down on resources in the long run. I used the leftover lumber from my house's old walls to build more of our perimeter wall and made another trip with the log sled to gather stone for the fireplace. Now this thing was expensive as hell, but ultimately worth the investment. I even decided to mount a little mantle on the face of it and put one over the bed for more storage. Cannibal attacks are becoming much more frequent, and the enemies inside of those attacks are typically much tougher than they used to be. Luckily though, those traps we've placed down seem to take care of most of them. I cut all of this wood into firewood for the winter, stockpile our shells with some of the more important crafting materials, and decide to mass produce some Molotov cocktails. These were great to have in a pinch, especially against those tougher, creepy enemies. With how many fish we started pulling in from our traps and Kelvin's efforts, I decided to make a large shelving unit alongside our house to store more dried fish. Then I thought to myself, if Kelvin can pull fish from this river for us, why couldn't I place fish traps up here for easier access? I just built one of them for now because I wasn't entirely sure this was going to work, but we'll have to check it tomorrow. Crafted up some much-needed bone armor before nightfall, and slept like a baby knowing the base was fully stone and I had a cozy new fireplace to warm me. Day 10 begins with some of the standard looting and harvesting stone, but at one point I decided to put a gate in our front little perimeter wall for easier access in and out. Virginia and her screaming nipples give us a big thumbs up, and I'm quite proud of how it's looking so far. I also head down to the bunker to keep up on resources and tech mesh, but after returning to the base I find out that we're under attack. Again. These traps are a fucking godsend though, and take care of most of them, but even if it doesn't kill them, it lowers their HP enough that we can typically one-shot them. After the fight ends, Virginia offers us another gift. Of air. Okay, thanks. Now at this point, I remembered putting down that fish trap in the river, and upon closer inspection discovered that it actually does indeed work, which means Operation Mass Fish Farm is a go! Now here's where things got a little bit interesting. You see, after my first playthrough with my buddies, the game had an update where they added electric fences. I had no clue how to build them and couldn't find them in the survival handbook, so I just started experimenting. After some trial and error, I found out that you could attach a wire to a stick fence, and I was reasonably certain this was going to work if it was powered with a solar panel. So, I got to work on removing some of that short wall around my base in favor of this electric fence, and ran wire the whole way around. Upon placing the solar panel, though, I couldn't seem to find a way to power the fence, at least not yet. That will be a discovery for an entirely different day. I decided to use the little daylight that I had left to work on the perimeter wall and snuggled into my horribly uncomfortable stick bed for a well-deserved rest. And that, good people, marks the first 10 days of our survival journey. I really tried my best to explain things along the way for those of you who have never played this game and have no idea what's going on, so hopefully I did a good enough job and you still found some entertainment in it. The remaining episodes of this miniseries won't be quite as information-packed now that you all have a base understanding of how the combat, building, and survival mechanics work, but there's still a lot of the journey to unfold here. Like I mentioned before, I have well over 25 hours of gameplay footage in this playthrough alone, and I'm trying my best to condense it all in a way that's entertaining and fluid without losing too much of what makes it so special. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, then please be sure to leave me a like down below, subscribe to the channel with notifications on so you can stay up to date on all of my latest content, join the Discord for a community of like-minded withered creatures, and please keep leaving me comments because they warm my little Bunneh heart. A special thank you goes out to all of the Bunnehs that support me on Patreon. You guys are amazing, and with recent adjustments that I've made to the tiers, you can now support me for as little as $1 a month. Thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.